Hi again then guys, and welcome to of course another specific look at a certain car from the roster of vehicles in GT Sport, and this is one which again is a returning face when it comes to my reviews. We have talked about it before in this same series for Gran Turismo 6 though. Instead, the Mini Vision GT concept. Now quite a few of these Vision GT cars suffered from the same issue in GT6, and that was a lack of tuning. Some of them could be tuned in terms of the settings, but not upgraded in terms of actual parts, apart from, for instance, tyres or an oil change. That was about all you could do to them. Now that hasn't really changed that much, unfortunately, but if I recall correctly, in comparison to now, you can do at least as much settings tuning, if not more so now, to this Mini than you could before. And one of the great things about it is it has a very similar stance, I think, to something like the Mitsubishi Tarmac rally car from the past of the Gran Turismo franchise, GT4 through GT6, where it has kind of a chunky appearance, but it's also ultra compact at the same time, which is not too surprising for a Mini. And speaking again about the proportions of the car, how chunky it is, it's not as heavy as it looks. It looks easily like a 12 or 1300 kilo, probably hybrid, for example, you'd assume looking at it. It weighs 1050. That's way lower than you typically assume it would be. And consequently, even though it's actually one of the lower powered Vision GTs, which isn't too surprising given that it's a Mini, but it's got just under 390 horsepower and just over, well, technically just over 300 pound-feet of torque, 315 to be exact, so it's a decent amount over. The weight though, combined with that power, means that the horsepower per tonne is not that far off the far more powerful, for instance, Ferrari 458 Italia, which we reviewed recently. Now of course that car also weighs a lot more, and that brings us back to the advantage of this one. It's chunky, but it's lightweight. It weighs barely more than a metric tonne, so of course it's going to be nimble. It's a Mini. Now off-road, I think it feels fantastic. On-road, it's decent. It's good even. But on the dirt, it just becomes a different machine. It becomes so much more fun than I ever had with it in GT6. And this again is one of those occasions where I think the physics of GT Sport and the style of the game, the driving style, actually definitely improves certain cars. In terms of, I mean, for me at least, the enjoyment that I get out of them. Again, referencing the Ferrari 458, that car feels way better now than it ever did for me in GT6. Likewise, I think with this Mini, I believe if I recall correctly, I did a rally tune for that Mini, but I don't recall it having the best handling. It was kind of like the Subaru, where it's got that weird front-heavy steering. This one, though, in GT Sport, I think feels way better. So ultimately, although the vehicle doesn't necessarily bring anything radically new to the table when it comes to GT Sport compared to GT6, I do think that it's an improvement straight away when you drive it in terms of how good it feels to drive. Now unfortunately you still do not have a cockpit cam, and there are a number of course of Vision GTs that still don't, which is unfortunate, but the amount of people who are actually going to use the Mini is probably far lower than a typical car in the game, so it's not going to annoy as many people because most people probably won't drive it that much. But for those who do, it's unfortunate. It is unfortunate. We've mentioned that before, and we'll probably discuss cars again that also don't have an interior. Now in terms of usability, of course I have to bring it up. I discuss it all the time because it comes up so often, but Group X. Of course the car is in Group X. All of the Vision GTs are. And from a certain point of view you can understand that, because if this were, for instance, in a road car category, it would be N400, and it would be extremely OP in N400. It would probably be one of the best ones out there, especially off-road. So from that point of view, it makes sense, but it's just unfortunate in terms of how much use you can actually get out of it. You can get some, but not exactly the same as a road car. So again, it's kind of in a grey area for me. I want to like these cars more, but for all the things that are good about them, they just shoot themselves in the foot in terms of usability and the lack of tuning, the fact that it costs 1 million credits. And again, that's one of the issues with having a standardized price across all Vision GTs. From one point of view it sounds cool because it means they're all equal, but the cars themselves are not equal, so it's not really fair. I mean, why should a Daihatsu or a Mini cost the same as a Tomahawk or a Chaparral. That doesn't really make much sense. On the one end of the spectrum, it means that the Tomahawk is potentially amazingly good value because it's so fast for 1,000,000 credits, but then on this end of the spectrum, a Daihatsu or a Mini, but with the performance of a Daihatsu and a Mini, not exactly supercar level, still being 1,000,000 credits, that's quite a lot. So for value, I can't really say that I recommend it either. Now, I definitely wouldn't say don't buy the Mini. It's not a bad car by any stretch, but I would say that this is probably one of the Vision GTs that, unless you're specifically a Mini fan, I would probably hold off on, because it's not like you're going to need it that much, and you're probably going to win one at some point. But even if you don't, you could get around to buying it eventually. Just don't set your sights and your hopes too high for this car. I would recommend trying it off-road first, because you'll get a ton of enjoyment out of it, and of course try it on-road as well, but it really is on the dirt that this car comes into its element. Which again is kind of appropriate given the rally history of the Mini brand, in Monte Carlo for instance with the 1275 Cooper. So ultimately, there's a lot to like. There's a lot of unfortunate stuff, not just about this car, but about a number of Vision GTs. And, you know, take it or leave it. Of course, all reviews, you have to decide at the end of the day whether or not you want to fork out the money on a particular car, but I would recommend taking more caution with something that is so expensive as to whether or not you feel that it's actually useful, or that you'll actually get some fun out of it at least, basically. But that's it for this review overall. Of course, I will see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.